Welcome everybody to our final panel for today, where we'll address the question, how can consumers eat well without wrecking the planet? So a new paper was recently published by the FAO and NASA, which found that the global food system was responsible for a third of all global emissions. Now, shifting consumer diets will be a key part of reducing this impact, and we're delighted to welcome here Professor Jessica Fanzo, Bloomberg Distinguished Professor of Global Food Policy and Ethics at Johns Hopkins University, who is also part of the EAT-Lancet Commission investigating this very topic. She also serves as the director of Hopkins' Global Food Policy and Ethics Program and as director of Food and Nutrition Security at Hopkins Alliance for a Healthier World. She is joined by David Yeung, founder and CEO of Green Monday Group, a multifaceted social venture taking on the world's most pressing crisis of climate change, food insecurity, and public health through a combination of social movement, food tech, innovation, and impact investment. An Ashoka Fellow, Mr. Yeung was awarded Social Entrepreneur of the Year in 2018 by the World Economic Forum. Rounding up the panel is Professor Jeyakumar Henry, Senior Advisor at the Singapore Institute of Food and Biotechnology Innovation. He was the founding director of the Clinical Nutrition Research Centre at A*STAR and the Functional Food Centre in Oxford. He was awarded the British Nutrition Foundation Award in 2010 for his outstanding contribution to human nutrition. In moderating this panel, we have Danielle Nierenberg, co-founder of Food Tank, a non-profit organization focusing on building a global community for safe, healthy, and nourished eaters. Food Tank is a global convener, research organization, and non-biased creator of original research impacting the food system. Danielle is the recipient of the 2020 Julia Child Award. And now, without further ado, I'd like to start this panel and turn it over to Danielle. Take it away, please.
It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. So I want to thank you for that kind introduction. And, again, I am Dani Nierenberg, president and co-founder of Food Tank. It is an incredible honor to be here. I want to congratulate the organizers of this event for putting together such a diverse group of people and experts to talk about some incredibly important issues. The three experts on this panel are people I greatly admire, and I'm excited to have a really dynamic and interactive discussion with them about the idea, this question of eaters can eat well without wrecking the planet. And it's such an important question, more important than ever before. And our three experts, Jessica, David, and Jai, are all coming from different perspectives about what it means to eat a nutrient-dense diet that is good for both people and the planet. And I think we can no longer think of food just as fuel in the form of calories, and our production systems really need to focus on more than just yields. We need food and agriculture systems that nourish both people and the planet, and that really helps solve some of our most pressing environmental and social challenges, from the climate crisis to creating more diverse and racially just food systems. And also food systems that recognize the voices that typically haven't had a seat at the table in decision making. We need more youth, more people who identify as women, more LGBTQ plus folks, more BIPOC folks, and others that have often been underrepresented. And I really believe, and I know many of you watching today believe, that agriculture is the solution. That if we grow, process, store, distribute, sell, serve, cook, and dispose of food in sustainable ways, and if we honor and respect those who are working all along the supply chain, that we can create a system that is economically, socially, and environmentally sustainable and nutritious and delicious. And those are really important points. So I want to thank our panelists again, and all of you who are able to watch today. We'll have times for Q&A, and I really look forward to hearing from everyone in the audience. So Jess, if it's okay, I'd really like to start with you. You were a contributor, as was said earlier, to the EAT-Lancet report, which came out a few years ago. And for folks who don't know about the commission and the report, it basically asked how we can feed a future population that may be 10 billion or more within planetary boundaries. And the answer of the commission and the report was basically yes, but they recommended really dramatic transformations of our current diets. And that planetary health diet turned out to be pretty controversial in a lot of circles. But it also spurred, and I think this is probably the most important thing about the report, it spurred a lot of debate. It created much needed dialogue and discussion. And so I'm wondering a couple of things. One, what's a planetary diet look like? And two, what are your thoughts about the EAT-Lancet report now?
Yeah, great to share a stage with you, Danny, as always. I was just talking about you the other day, and I always feel that you're probably the leading expert in this space, and you're always facilitating and moderating these incredible debates, but I think you can answer these questions much better than I can. So yeah, the EAT-Lancet was indeed controversial, but as you had rightly said, it did spur this global debate around what kind of foods is our food system producing and moving around the world, and what kind of diets are we consuming. And the EAT-Lancet looked really at two different areas. One is, what are people eating in the world, and are those diets healthy? And if we were to move to a healthier and more environmentally sustainable diet, what planetary boundaries or Earth systems do we not want to cross where we can't go back, we can't reverse? That would be detrimental for the planet and, of course, for all species living on her. So the diet, rooted mainly in randomized controlled trial cohort prospective type studies, many of them coming from high income countries, recommended a very plant dominant diet. So high in fruits and vegetables, high in legumes, nuts, seeds, healthy oils, but very low, and this is the controversy, on animal source foods. Low red meat, low processed meat, low white environmental footprint diets, but still quite low on a weekly basis, the consumption of those animal source foods. The other big controversy was really around how our food production systems would need to be completely redesigned. As you know, Danny, David, and Jaya, how much it would take to change our agriculture systems to meet that Lancet diet that was recommended. Massive reductions in livestock production, significant reductions in grain production, which dominates our landscapes, and significant increases in fruits, vegetables, and legume production. So those two things were very controversial. And I think at the end of the day, Danny, it's really, some countries need to make much bigger changes to their diets, much bigger changes in how they do agriculture production, and other countries don't need to push so hard. Some countries don't get enough animal source foods. So there's a real inequity in who gets what, who is controlling the food system, and the power imbalances. And so I think one thing that EAT-Lancet didn't do enough was talking about those inequities, and what do we do about those inequities?
Absolutely. And that's such a great point to bring up. And I want to talk about that and some silo breaking later with you, Jess. But one of the things, and this frankly bothered me greatly about the EAT-Lancet report, and there's so much good information in it. And again, it spurred all of this dialogue, which I'm so appreciative of. But I asked the EAT folks at the beginning, and I asked Walt Willett from Harvard, who was, such a leader in the report, were farmers involved? And I think that gets to your inequity question. And there weren't farmers involved as far as I know.
No, we didn't have, I mean, we're all consumers, but we didn't have, this was a group of scientists coming from some of the leading institutions, many of them in the northern parts of the world. We had some colleagues from Africa and Asia, but not enough. That if we think about the world's population and who's growing our food and who the consumer base will be by 2050, we need to shift the entire commission in in the other direction and have a lot more Asian and African and Latin American colleagues involved. And I think that would have changed the lens and how we looked at the issues of food systems. We were very much looking at the evidence and looking at peer review journals, again, very biased towards the global north. We could call it that. So there was a whole kind of slanting of that. And I think over the last year, I mean, Danny, you and I are in the United States, we've seen a real kind of questioning of some of these, who's making decisions, who's leading scientific endeavors, who's high level, why do we have high level panels?
Sure.
Who's calling themselves high level? So I think there's a lot of those kind of issues that the EAT-Lancet, a lot of those questions arose during when that was published about who are these people and why were they chosen and why should we be listening to them? And I think those are great, valid questions in international development now of really widening the voice and thinking about different types of evidence and different types of science and new experts instead of the usual suspects. And I think EAT-Lancet, along with many other of these global reports where you see some of the usual suspects are starting to be questioned, which I think is incredibly healthy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We do need different types of experts and they need to be recognized and honored, as I said before. So thank you so much, Jess. Jaya, I'd love to turn to you. And I've heard you talk about the EAT-Lancet report, and Jess mentioned this, is it really is looking at food choices through a Western or a global Northern kaleidoscope. Can you explain what you mean specifically by that and why we need to get away from that very global North perspective? And more importantly, how do we do that? We can't hear you, or I can't.
Okay, good to see you. The last time I saw you was in Milan, so it's nice to see you back again. So,
You too.
So I think Jessica framed the Lancet, EAT-Lancet document in a very eloquent way. I see the Lancet document as a landmark document for two reasons. Firstly, for the first time, it married planetary health with human health. And that's a remarkably shift of paradigm. Now, it is admittedly true that it is a document that's work in progress. And I think nobody in the panel, including Jessica, whom I've known for many years, will be the first to say the lens was through a Western lens, partly because you got to start somewhere. The key element is that to first recognize how do we retool and realign the document. So to give you a simple example, much of the document talks about eating a predominantly plant-based diet and a very minimal animal-based diet that may not be directly relevant to the health and nutrition of people in developing countries. I'll talk about it in a minute. Because if you look at the totality of the unit cost of making a EAT-Lancet type diet for people in the developing world, it's been well established that it's far too expensive. Now, here's the sting in the tail. I see the Lancet document, or the EAT-Lancet document, to be precise, as an important document to inform and influence how we take on board some of the anomalies that the document brought out. And I think I don't have a simple answer, but I think the key point is what Jessica has already alluded to. How do we bring much more talented people from parts of Africa, Asia, Latin America, wherever, who will have first-hand experience of how we can look at nutrition in a much more holistic way. To give you one simple example, I live in Singapore, as does David live in Hong Kong, affluent nations. We are surrounded by a cacophony of countries around Asia that have got 30, 25% stunting. Right now, stunting, as you know, you grow up to a stunted mother, and the mother gives rise to low birth weight children. Now, it turns out that despite all that people might say and the great attributes of plant-based diets, which I have no dispute, that for linear growth, you might need a small amount of animal-based protein. Now, this is a very important point. So the point is that it can't be where we have a food system that is universally applicable, But I see the Lancet document as an important one for us to start a discourse and debate just like this, because
Right.
I think it needs refinement. And I look at this as a manuscript that might go into 2 or 3 iterations, but I think it's a journey that's well worth doing and well supported to do.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think one really important aspect is when we think about agriculture, when we think about nutrition and agriculture, that we have to remember the culture part.
Absolutely.
And what the EAT-Lancet report and I think subsequent reports from the Bareilles Center for Food and Nutrition Foundation and others are really trying to hone in on that cultural aspect of diets and how they differ from place to place. And I think that's a really important aspect. And so David, if I could turn to you now, so you're really focused on creating awareness and inspiring consumers in really creative ways. And I think what you've been able to achieve with Green Monday is astounding, because it's really been a game changer. Can you just briefly describe what Green Monday is for folks who might not know? I feel like everyone who's watching today probably does, but for those who may not.
Right. Well, thank you. Green Monday is it indeed requires a little bit of introduction because of the broadness of the group. On one hand, we have the advocacy that is promoting meat-free or meatless Monday, or just advocating people to go one day a week as a starting point of the shifting. Now, you just said earlier, right? Agriculture and food. I mean, culture is a big part of it. I mean, if we want to change people behavior, I mean, people are not going to change overnight 180 degrees. That just can't happen. So how to nudge people slowly, but then if you actually can get, a massive population, whether it is, 5 million, 50 million, or maybe even higher, to take that step together, then that baby step would become a giant leap. And that is what the Green Monday movement is about. So that's number one. But I mean, besides advocating the movement and educating people on the why, equally importantly is to provide the solutions on how to switch. So that's where our Green Common and Omni Foods come in. Omni Foods is our food innovation arm that focuses on plant-based meats alternative. And now with Omni Pork and the recently unveiled Omni Seafood, these are two of the most important protein categories, particularly on outside of the world. So pork is the most consumed meat globally, and particularly in China and across Asia Pacific. And seafood, 73% of global seafood is consumed in Asia. So really, these are the two main animal protein. And that's also the reason why these are the two plant-based protein that we want to create and provide people with the alternative. And that's under Omni Foods. But at the same time, food or food products alone still cannot get the job done, because food is about experience. Food is about social. Food is emotional, right? So whether it's a birthday dinner or an anniversary dinner or a Christmas Eve dinner, why people want to have a special meal to celebrate is because food is much more than just the food. It is about the total experience. And that's the reason why we also create Green Common, which is our one-stop shopping and dining destination of this new innovative plant-based lifestyle. We want to give people a whole new interpretation and understanding of what this new plant-based dining is about. It's, particularly in Asia, vegetarianism is actually not new. I mean, a lot of people, particularly because of faith and religion, have been reducing or not eating meat for a long time. But that used to be perceived in a much more of a kind of like religious and definitely not mainstream fashion. So having Green Common as a physical destination, sometimes I like to say Green Common is like the Apple Store of the innovative plant-based food, and it is about creating that chicness, kind of this new lifestyle that we want people to aspire to join. So really all of the above, the movement, the food innovation, and then the food destination and experience, that combined is what Green Monday is about.
Thanks so much. And I guess I want to push back a little bit. And this is a question for you all. a big fan of plant-based foods and plant-forward foods. But one concern that I've had over the last 5 or 6 years in particular is the number of ingredients in many of the plant-based alternatives, and also dairy alternatives and seafood alternatives. And so I'm wondering, Jaya, for example, you've been doing so much research on the human health impacts of plant-based alternatives. But how do you sort of, when you're looking at ingredient lists, it can be very confusing to consumers, especially if you look at something, I'm just going to call them out, like the Impossible Burger. Lots of ingredients, very ultra processed. So how do we sort of, create more plant-based foods that don't have this, lots of chemicals and a really long list of ingredients?
Great question, Jenny. So I think there are 3 very important points. The alternative protein paradigm is a disruptive science that we have never seen ever in our history. So here is a food system that I call the third food revolution. The first being the domestication of plants, second being the access of modern food technology in the 1800s. Why do I call this a third food revolution? Is because we are doing something exceptional here. We deconstruct the food and then we reconstruct it. What do I mean by that? We take protein from soya isolate, we take oil from coconut, we take cassava from cassava starch, put a series of additives and make it mimic and look like meat. Right? So this has never happened in history ever. But again, I think we need to recognize that this is an interesting phenomenon in that it can be a vehicle for many, many sources of addition of nutrients in a way that we never have had a chance before. So to answer the question, Danny, you need to inevitably have a cacophony of ingredients to provide the flavor, the texture, the mouthfeel, the organoleptics, and the nutrition. But I can tell you here and now that the science is moving so fast and so phenomenally rapidly that in the next year or two, that length of the ingredient list is going to come down from being an arm's length to a hand's length. Because I can tell you, every single company, including David's, are aware of the need to reduce those ingredients. So I think this is what I would call part of the territory. Part of the territory of new innovation is that you need to have additives because you're trying to mimic something that you're accustomed to. But I reckon that this revolution is going to stay, and I think this is an unprecedented revolution in food science that we are seeing in the production of alternative protein systems. So I'm very optimistic.
I'm so glad to hear that. And David, I want to give you a chance to respond. I mean, how do you create that awareness among consumers that, there's a shift happening, certainly that Green Monday has been a part of, but how do you sort of get folks to understand that foods are going to change? And so right now they might be ultra processed in a way that, is not great, but that things are going to change and they're going to be healthier and more nutritious in the future.
Well, first of all, I want to comment that I cannot speak for other brands, but I can speak for Omni, which is directly developed by us. And we do have a significantly shorter ingredient list than majority of the other alternative protein brand. I mean, these are just plain facts. I mean, in terms of looking at the nutrition label, and also in terms of the nutrition value. I mean, in terms of saturated fat, sodium, you name them. I mean, Omni indeed is cleaner. Now, I do want to explain, every time when people ask about kind of the degree of process of, whether it's alternative meats or just processed food in general. Now, I always like to say that, of course, if you want the most wholesome diets, people should be eating organic kale, organic quinoa, pumpkin, eggplant, tomato, you name them, right? But today, most of the people, if 10 is the healthiest and 1 is the least healthy, or just jump completely, right? Upgrading people from processed meats to alternative meats is at least going from maybe, let's say, a 1 or 2 to at least a 6 or 7 or 8, depending on the brand. So it is still an upgrade, actually a very significant upgrade, because if people are eating bacon today, or sausage, or many of these processed meats, these are classified as carcinogenic by the World Health Organization, and they are indeed very, very bad for our health. So heart disease, cancer, too many of them. It's a long list. So first of all, that's an upgrade. We should not be comparing meat alternative to organic kale, because that would be a 10. But most people would refuse to just eat organic kale or organic quinoa. So having that intermediate step really help facilitate both, obviously better for the planet, better for health, but also make sure that people are not sacrificing on their palate on something that they've been eating all their life. So that's really the main purpose.
Absolutely. Jess, you've done so many things during your career. I can't list them all, but you've really started as a nutritionist, and I'm wondering what your thoughts on some of these ultra-processed plant-based foods, and really commenting on what Jaya and David had to say about moving forward and convincing folks that there's a way to eat healthy without sacrificing the taste and the texture and all of these things that people want from their plant-based foods.
Yeah, it's a tough area, because I think it really depends on what people value. If they and I think some of these alternative products, like the plant-based products that are mimicking red meat, the smell, look, feels, tastes like red meat but not red meat. I think that's good for a certain segment of the population, but there's many vegetarians that argue they don't have a craving for red meat, so why would I try these products?
Right.
But I think it's also, what do you as a person value, and does that product fit in your values? So if you care about animal welfare, maybe eating these plant-based meats are important. If you care about health, maybe you would not prioritize those foods. Maybe you'd go more towards legumes or vegetable legume or pea-based types products. So I think it really just depends on what the person cares about. And I almost wish we had a labeling system on the front of packages more around values. Like, okay, if you care about animal welfare, this product checks that box. If you care about fair trade, this product checks that box.
Yeah.
If you care about water footprint. Right? I wish we had sort of a range of values, and people could say, okay, this one checks the box on animal foods and fair trade and nutrition. This is the kind of product I want to buy.
Sure.
And it's giving that information to people and allowing for them to make those choices. And I really resonated with David, the nudging aspect. I think there's really something to be said about, subconsciously almost delving into people's tastes and what they care about, what they like, and providing new products that do that. And there's going to be trade-offs with every kind of food that we consume. Not everything is going to check all those ethical boxes, right?
Absolutely.
Can I share a very quick story? Just talking about the human aspect. So personally, I've been vegetarian for 20 years. And 17 years ago, when I had my wedding banquet was a vegetarian wedding banquet. So I just got together with a friend, a longtime friend from my high school days, and he attended my wedding. Now, 17 years later, a couple of weeks ago, he admitted to me that actually that night it was so unfulfilling to him that he went home and he still had another meal after my meal or coming to my banquet. And he compared how now with all these new products, whether it's the burger or the plant-based dumpling or all these, plant-based has evolved so much. And now he, as a complete meat eater, he hasn't changed in 17 years, but now he can have a very delicious and fulfilling meal, even though it's completely vegan, compared to 17 years ago when he dread, and he still remember how unfulfilling it was. So this is just a kind of a life example. A little bit funny, but a kind of a life example of indeed nudging people requires a lot of things, and sometimes, you know, they're not asking for the most wholesome thing, they're not asking for the most sustainable, right? They simply want a fulfilling meal.
Absolutely. I want to shift gears a little bit. One thing that we haven't talked about is accessibility and affordability of nutritious, you know, plant forward or plant-based foods. And I think that's such an important part of this conversation. And it goes back to the inequities that Jess talked about at the beginning. And I just want to give a shout out to her new book, Can Fixing Dinner Fix the Planet, which is an exceptional book and really outlines a lot of these things. And Jess, you have a section on inequities and the costs of diets. And for a lot of folks right now, whether we're talking about the United States or other parts of the world, you know, having a plant forward or plant-based diet is just beyond their reach because it's too expensive. And so how do we address these inequities? And maybe David, you want to go first and address that?
Well, first of all, I mean, if we're talking about plant-based food, particularly plant-based meat alternative, we are significantly shortening the food supply chain. We are obviously eliminating the whole animal factory farming, all the labor, all the pollution, all the input into these animals. So from a long-term standpoint, actually, I don't even say long-term, from a medium-term standpoint, plant-based meat alternative is going to be cheaper than meats because it is simply a shorter food supply chain. We're eliminating so much inefficient areas, not to mention heavily polluting. But it takes a little time to get there because everything in the world requires economy of scale for it to become affordable. So the fact that there are a lot of investors coming into this space, of course, entrepreneurs, etc., is to get us to that scale so that they can be affordable. So I am very optimistic that, you know, reasonably good tasting, healthy plant-based food will be affordable to most people. Now, unfortunately, we cannot compete with utter junk food because sometimes those are truly the worst quality food that have no nutrition and actually are detrimental to our health. So maybe not to that level, but I am very confident that most of the plant-based food companies can achieve price parity with the meats or, you know, whatever category that they're replacing.
Great. Jess, why don't you go next? How do we address these inequities?
Yeah, I think it's a huge issue, and I don't know if the three of you had a chance to look at the FAO's SIFBI report this week. Hunger numbers have gone up significantly, and surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, Asia is particularly hit hard. You know, and obviously COVID, this is the first report where we're getting COVID numbers related to hunger. And, you know, so the SIFBI, the State of Food Insecurity, is also reporting on the affordability of a healthy diet. And that's at somewhere around 3 billion people can't afford a healthy diet. Isn't that incredible? That it's really,
that's chills.
And this is just, I know it's just a basic healthy diet too. So this is just devastating and tragic, and potentially could get worse if the economic downturn sort of continues and the recovery takes longer. I mean, from an access point of view, we can think about people's physical access to shops and places to get to buy or order food. There's the economic access piece, which is what the SIFBI report. But then there's the social access piece. Again, who you are, the color of your skin, what's your tribe, what's your caste, what's your ethnicity, all plays into being disadvantaged and marginalized by every system, not just the food system, but the health system, the education system, and those all interact. So while we can call on the food system to try to improve the physical and economic access through many ways, subsidies, improving agriculture, making foods affordable and more accessible through different physical access means, the social access issue, these inequities because of who you are and purposefully being marginalized, that goes beyond food systems and requires, I mean, Danny, you write and talk about this a lot, but this requires a completely different way in the way we think and govern ourselves, and taking a much more social justice approach. And so while it's important for us to be thinking about food systems and this whole forum around food systems, we can't ignore that there's all of these massive drivers that are shaping food systems in different directions. And it's, people will say, well, that's just too big, it's too hard to change. But we'll keep having these food system forums for the next 3 decades, figuring out what's gone wrong if we don't address these bigger issues. So maybe it's time for all of us to start thinking beyond just our disciplines and getting involved in politics and governance and holding big corporations to account and issues like that. So, and governance. Yeah,
we definitely need a revolution in so many ways. And Jaya, the one thing that you talked about, and I think this relates to inequities in a big way, is how must nutrition security be part of these conversations? I mean, that's one thing that we haven't brought up either. Nutrition security. It's not just about food security or food insecurity. It's nutrition security.
Yeah. Here is the paradox. As we stand today, there are approximately 900 companies around the world working on methods of making alternative proteins. Now, ironically, almost all of them focus at the apex of the pyramid. And that's a very important point. In other words, much of the AP products that are globally available are addressing the segment that is rich, affluent, and by and large capable of buying. Now, my argument is that my generation tried to actually get more equitably distributed food, but we couldn't achieve it. But younger ones like you have this incredible opportunity to actually wealth create, but also to health create. And I think that the next smart investor and scientist who are working on alternative protein is to look at the bulk of the pyramid and the base of the pyramid, look at foods that are low cost but high value. And if you remember, the famous economist Prahlad said, there's money at the base of the pyramid. It's all about the game of money and sums and the numbers. So I think this narrative is very, very important, that we, in our trust and enthusiasm for promulgating alternative proteins, miss a unique opportunity to change the footprint of mankind and to ask the question, what is your blueprint for life? Is it just to make money or also to provide health? And I think that's an important imperative.
That is the question. Thank you so much, Jaya. That's so inspiring. We have about 7 minutes left, and there's a question from the audience that I think gets into that government aspect that Jess talked about earlier. And so the question is from Luis Garcia, and what is the role of policy in moving populations like the United States toward a more plant-based diet? Do we believe significant change can or will come from government, or will we continue to rely on social movements alone? And I think Luis kind of answers their own question there, but I don't know who wants to take that on first. Maybe Jess?
To me, I think we need it's not just one group, of course. We need governments to step in and regulate and provide incentives where necessary. Private sector is going to play a huge role. They understand demand. They understand what's tasty. They understand food science. They'll be critically important. But then we need the social movements to keep pushing our governments to take action, to tell them to stop ignoring the food system. I mean, you look at the U.S., it's sort of just like a free-for-all. Everyone jump on board and do whatever the heck you want. And we see a lot of other countries moving in that same direction. This free market, anything goes. And that can have devastating consequences. Like we're seeing, The Guardian today has got a big article on the monopolization of food.
Sure.
And it was really interesting reading that article, Danny. At the very bottom, and it was the United States, the very bottom, they give a hotline on if you are contemplating suicide. And I found that incredibly interesting.
Yeah.
It was just at the very bottom of the article, because reading some of these issues related to the food system is really depressing.
Yeah.
And shocking. So I thought that was quite profound reading that this morning. But to me, it's not just one group. It's governments, private sector, civil society advocating, pushing governments to take action. To say governments need to do it all, it's just not going to happen.
Right.
So we need everyone pushing in the system. We need consumers demanding new kinds of foods. If everyone stopped buying Coke in the world, Coke would probably shift, and Coca-Cola, the company, would probably try to find another product to make. So demand can be very powerful in shaping and changing supply. So I think it requires everybody, unfortunately.
Well, I mean, I think it's
not one person's going to solve it.
I mean, we need collaboration. And David, on the private sector point, you know, there's so much power in what you and Omni are doing. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Well, first of all, I totally believe that government stepping in is only a matter of time. They have to. In fact, food insecurity is something that is immediately urgent. I mean, look at all these extreme weather events or climate events. Right now, in the entire west coast of the U.S., is extreme droughts that is unprecedented, and of course, most recently, like 48 degrees Celsius or 120 degree Fahrenheit in Pacific Northwest. That's just unheard of. So first of all, we have a serious food insecurity issue. I mean, famine and just hunger in general. This will totally worsen. So number one, governments need to step in. This is really about how to feed their country and also globally. But second, in terms of private sector, I totally think that food or not food business, you know, all the leaderships, you know, CEOs, the C-suites, they can all make policies in terms of implementing some form of flexitarian, you know, food decisions for the company, for example. So the whole company, I mean, most of these companies, how difficult it is for them to implement a meat-free Monday or Friday or Wednesday, right? I mean, this is good for the health of the planet and good for the health of the employees. It's just a win-win. So I see, as Jess said just now, every party needs to be a part of the solution because we are all part of the problem. So we cannot just say, oh, just point to the government or point to the CEO. We need all of us to change. And all of us have the power to make a difference.
Absolutely. Great point. Jaya, what are your thoughts?
I think what the COVID has taught us all is how incredibly interconnected we have to be. So if you want to have a successful nation without COVID, you better get everybody else vaccinated, irrespective of country of origin. I think similar to what Jesse and David said, we need to have a system where there's much more interconnectivity between our food systems, because much as we are talking rhetoric now, in reality, we have very little connections between what we are doing in Asia, metaphorically with what's happening in Africa, in Latin America and North America. And I have to be honest with you, you guys in North America have a very, very important role to play. How do you steer the state, the machinery, and the institutions that actually have a profound effect on people millions of miles away? Equally, how can we engage in a way that we haven't done in the past? Because it is quite interesting, is it not, that it was the birth of the EAT-Lancet document that even opened up this debate about how can we have a connection between planetary health and human health. This should have been a de facto concept 20 years ago. But I think the point is that engagement between North and South, South and South is something that we should be encouraging. And I think I see elements like this discourse an important part in that narrative.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. That's such a great point. I've been told I have 5 extra minutes, so I'm going to take them. And we have a great question, a great question from the audience from Jennifer. I'm going to butcher your last name, Valoria. Why do we have to focus on global food systems Why can't we talk about localizing food systems? Amazing question, Jennifer. Thank you. I don't know who wants to take that on. If not, I'll pick on one of you.
I mean, I can start us off, and it'd be great to hear. I think it's a great question, and I think that question has really come to the spotlight with COVID. People were concerned about the movement of food and being able to have food sovereignty and food security. I think we need both. Again, I'm always we need everybody. We need all hands on deck approach, but sure. We definitely need global food systems because in some places, if I were living in upstate New York or some colder parts of China, my diet would be pretty limited. If I relied only on local food systems, particularly in the winter months, I would be eating potatoes and
turnips.
Highly processed foods, right? Yeah. So, there's a risk of not trade. And we published a paper a few years ago that global trade is really important in moving nutrients around the world. And without trade, we'd see significant increases in micronutrient deficiencies. The problem is global trade also moves around highly processed packaged foods that are not so healthy. So I think the global food is important for the diversity and the variety of foods. But local foods are incredibly important in spurring social cohesion, more awareness of what is grown locally, supporting farmers locally and the entire ecosystem around local food hubs, and learning more about what kind of foods can be grown in your region seasonally. So I think you need both. And they both have different benefits and different, and both have trade-offs.
Absolutely. And I really like this idea of regionalization. How can we create more regional food systems while also having global, we're always going to have a global food system. I want coffee and chocolate. I want all the, the things that, can't be grown in Baltimore, Maryland. Mm-hmm. So we have to have that. Jaya, do you want to comment next?
Yeah, I mean, I was born in Sri Lanka, so I can tell you quite honestly by firsthand, there's always been a dilemma between growing cash crops and staple crops, because in the past, as Jessica has pointed out, it's much more prudent to grow, cash crops that you can sell in the global market and buy commodities at a much cheaper price. But today, people have realized that you have to have food self-sufficiency. Here in Singapore, the government has decided by 2030, 30% of all the food that we are going to have nutritionally needs is going to be produced locally. So de novo synthesis of 30% of our food by 2030. Very short runaway, but they will do it. The technology is there. We are becoming an incredibly powerful food technology institution. So I think every country will have to make that balance between local indigenous production in concert with what's easier to buy in the open market. We can't divorce one from the other, honestly.
Absolutely. David, last word on this question before we sum up.
Right, I can't agree more about particularly the case with Singapore. Now, places like Singapore and Hong Kong, we don't have farmland, so we have to rely on food import. But thanks to innovation with food, as Jaya just said, I mean, Singapore aims to produce 30% of their food domestically, which is unheard of. So indeed, on one hand, yes, there should be much more focus on local food and local agriculture. But on the other hand, innovation also can play a part on it.
Absolutely. This has been an incredible panel. I want to thank all of you. I'm in awe of all of the work that the three of you do. And it's really just been an honor to be part of this conversation. And I especially want to thank the participants, everyone who's up at different hours watching this meeting and participating. As Jess said before, we need all hands on deck. Jaya said we need to all remember that we're interconnected. And that collaboration is really key to achieve real concrete solutions. Sometimes these conversations are uncomfortable, but they're so needed. But we can't wait another 10 or 20 or 30 years. The urgency of what we're facing is incredible, and we need to act now. Thank you all again. This has been so great and an honor to be here.